President Biden's Investing in America agenda has created jobs and expanded manufacturing in every sector across the country. This section is entitled Revitalizing American Manufacturing for the Clean Economy. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act helped catalyze historic manufacturing growth through incentives for domestic production of clean energy inputs. Since President Biden took office, businesses announced more than $270 billion in private investments to manufacture clean energy and electric vehicle components, with factories opening across the industrial Midwest, the South, and beyond. The Inflation Reduction Act invested nearly $6 billion to slash climate pollution, create good union jobs, and support worker and community health at U.S. factories producing the steel, aluminum, cement, and other materials that form the backbone of our economy. These materials produce nearly a quarter of all U.S. carbon pollution, so these investments would result in cleaner communities and help ensure that U.S. innovations lead the world for decades to come. To further support U.S. industrial competitiveness, the Biden-Harris administration's landmark Buy Clean initiative leveraged the government's sway as the largest purchaser on earth to spur demand for the cleanest infrastructure materials. President Biden's agenda marked the largest U.S. clean manufacturing investment in history. Advancing the most ambitious environmental justice agenda in history, President Biden believed that every person has a right to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and live in a healthy community. The Biden-Harris administration prioritized embedding environmental justice into federal policies, programs, and decision-making within days of taking office in 2021. The president signed an historic executive order that called on the federal government to bring clean energy and healthy environments to all and mitigate harm to those who suffered from toxic pollution or other environmental burdens like climate change. The Biden-Harris administration took broad regulatory action to protect public health and secure environmental justice, including by finalizing ambitious regulatory protections for clean air, clean water, and fence-line communities. The administration took action to tackle plastic pollution and released the first comprehensive government-wide strategy to reduce the impact of plastic pollution throughout the plastic's life cycle. The president established historic offices to address environmental justice, including the first ever Office of Environmental Justice at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, the Office of Climate Change and Health Equity at the Department of Health and Human Services to address the impact of climate change on the health of the American people, and the Office of Environmental Justice at the Department of Justice to protect overburdened and underserved communities from the harm caused by environmental crimes, pollution, and climate change. Through the Justice 40 initiative, President Biden set a goal to deliver 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal climate, clean energy, affordable, and sustainable housing and other investments to disadvantaged communities that are overburdened by pollution and marginalized by underinvestment. Overall, 71% of the grants, loans, and other investments federal agencies made from Justice 40 programs in the initiative's first 2 fiscal years reached or benefited disadvantaged communities. The administration took unprecedented action to protect communities from PFAS, pollution, strengthen standards for hazardous air pollutants and toxic chemicals, and address legacy pollution. The administration invested $21 billion through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to clean up legacy pollution from Superfund and brownfield sites, orphaned oil and gas wells, and abandoned coal mine lands. President Biden established the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the first presidential advisory body of outside, community-based experts tasked with providing recommendations to the federal government on how to address environmental justice. Delivering clean water and replacing lead pipes. President Biden and Vice President Harris fought to ensure a future where every child and family has access to clean, safe water. the president's bipartisan infrastructure law invested $50 billion in upgrading the nation's water infrastructure, the largest investment in clean water in American history. States and localities have committed over $25 billion from the president's American Rescue Plan to water infrastructure projects. President Biden made an historic commitment to replace every toxic lead pipe in the country within a decade, protecting families from lead poisoning that can cause irreversible harm to children's brain development and disproportionately affects disadvantaged communities. Since the start of the Biden-Harris administration, nearly 500,000 lead pipes have been replaced nationwide, benefiting over 1.2 million people. The EPA issued the Lead and Copper Rule improvements that requires water systems nationwide to replace lead service lines within 10 years. The administration finalized the first ever national legally enforceable drinking water standard for PFAS, also known as forever chemicals, which will protect 100 million people from PFAS exposure, prevent tens of thousands of serious illnesses, and save lives. Tackling harmful emissions. President Biden took historic action to dramatically reduce U.S. and global superpollutant emissions. The Biden-Harris administration took nearly 100 actions in 2023 and 2024 to dramatically reduce methane emissions under the U.S. Methane Emissions Reduction Action Plan. The administration finalized an historic rule to reduce methane emissions from oil and gas operations by nearly 80%, announced a strategy to reduce methane emissions from food waste and landfills, set strong national standards to reduce climate pollution from passenger vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, power plants, and industry, while improving local air quality for communities, launched a national phase-down of hydrofluorocarbons to provide a 40% reduction in 2024 and an 85% reduction by 2036 of hydrofluorocarbons, and signed the U.S. ratification of the Kigali Amendment, an international agreement to help avoid up to 0.5 degrees Celsius of global warming by 2100 by phasing down these superpollutants. Biden rallied leading U.S. companies around new actions that by early 2025 would reduce overall U.S. industrial emissions of superpolluting nitrous oxide by over 50% compared to 2020 levels. Delivering a cleaner and more resilient federal government. The Biden-Harris administration transformed how the federal government builds, buys, and manages electricity, vehicles, buildings, infrastructure projects, and other operations to be clean and sustainable, while creating good, clean energy jobs, supporting American manufacturing, and saving taxpayers money by cutting energy and operating costs. Just 3 years since Biden signed Executive Order 14057 and issued his federal sustainability plan, greenhouse gas emissions from federal operations were down 38% from 2008 levels. The progress includes the following: investing over $12 billion and launching thousands of projects to transition the federal government's 300,000 buildings and 600,000 vehicles to electric vehicles and energy-efficient buildings powered by 100% carbon pollution-free electricity. Ordering nearly 82,000 electric vehicles and supporting the U.S. Postal Service's commitment to acquire 100% electric delivery trucks by 2026, the first of which have already started to roll through neighborhoods. Deploying over $4 billion in funding from the President's Investing in America agenda and public-private partnerships to launch thousands of modernization projects that will deliver energy-efficient, climate-resilient, and all-electric federal buildings, including at least 2,700 net-zero emissions buildings that are underway or complete today. Establishing the U.S. government's first-ever goal on plastic waste to phase out federal procurement of single-use plastics from food service operations, events, and packaging by 2027, and from all federal operations by 2035. Rallying the world. Under President Biden, the United States restored America's climate and environmental leadership at home and abroad, including by fulfilling a pledge to increase U.S. international climate finance to over $11 billion a year, announced during President Biden's historic trip to the Amazon rainforest, the first ever by a sitting president. Securing commitments from more than 155 countries to reduce global methane emissions by at least 30% relative to 2020 levels by 2030. Announcing a new U.S. climate target or nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement to reduce U.S. net emissions by 61 to 66 below 2005 levels in 2035. Successfully galvanizing other countries to commit for the first time to transition away from fossil fuels, stop building new unabated coal capacity globally, and triple renewable and nuclear energy globally by 2030 and 2050, respectively. Accelerating global action to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal within reach, including through stronger emission reduction targets. Bolstering global climate resilience by launching the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, which scaled up U.S. support for vulnerable developing countries to over $3 billion a year and marshaled over $3 billion in additional resources from U.S. and global companies and partners. Launching the Partnership for a Lead-Free Future, the first ever international public-private partnership dedicated to tackling lead exposure in low and middle income countries with over $150 million in global commitments. Releasing a set of principles to inform and guide the development of high-integrity, voluntary carbon markets to accelerate the deployment of climate technologies and nature-based solutions. Issuing the first-of-its-kind U.S. international deforestation framework to reduce commodity-driven deforestation and support countries in protecting and enhancing their forests. Joining the Freshwater Challenge, the largest ever global initiative to restore degraded rivers, lakes, and wetlands, which are central to tackling the world's intertwined water, climate, and nature crises. Becoming a world leader in innovative debt for nature swaps, high-integrity carbon markets, and land restoration investments that have helped countries unlock hundreds of millions in new financing for conservation investments. Launching the Women in the Sustainable Economy Initiative, a $2 billion partnership to promote women's access to jobs, training, leadership positions, and finance and clean energy. Unity Agenda. The day he took office, President Biden pledged to be a president for all Americans, and he worked tirelessly to keep that promise by advancing a unity agenda for the nation. The unity agenda addressed big challenges that unite all Americans: beating the opioid epidemic, tackling the mental health crisis, holding tech platforms accountable, meeting our sacred obligation to veterans, and ending cancer as we know it. President Biden signed into law more than 400 bipartisan bills to support his unity agenda. That includes the bipartisan MAT Act, which has allowed over 1.8 million more medical practitioners across America to provide life-saving treatment for opioid use disorder. The bipartisan Safer Communities Act, expanding access to mental health services in American schools. The PACT Act, the most significant expansion of benefits and services for veterans in more than 30 years, and bipartisan legislation to launch ARPA-H and drive breakthroughs against deadly diseases such as cancer. All right, stay tuned for the next section.